Well, welcome everybody tonight. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Debbie Schwartz, and I'm the founder of Road to College and the 80,000 member Paying for College 101 group. Our goal is to educate families about higher ed and particularly college admissions with a focus on paying for college. I'm excited about tonight's topic because this is information that a lot of families need to know about how to build a college list that's financially fit. And it's particularly important this time of year because students are starting to send in applications, but the hard deadlines haven't really hit yet. Early decisions coming up, regular decisions January 1st. So if you're a family with a senior, you still have a chance to rejigger your list, maybe potentially based on something you learned tonight. And then for new people who keep coming on, it's great if you could just say something in the chat, tell us where you're from. We see a lot of people, but it's nice to hear anybody who's coming in, where you're from, how many kids you have, what age they are. So we're going to get started, and let me introduce the three panelists we have tonight. So joining me is Jeff Selingo. Hopefully you've seen him around a lot by now. He's got a new book that's been out since September called Who Gets In and Why, and it's already a New York Times Book Review Editor's Choice and a USA Today bestseller. So thanks, Jeff. And I know you have a ton of information you're going to share with what you learned from putting your book together. We
Thanks.
also have Kim Clark. Kim developed Money Magazine's Best Colleges for the Money ranking, and she's now the Assistant Director at the Education Writers Association. So thanks. Welcome, Kim. And we also have John Leach. John's from Emory University, and he's currently the Associate Vice Provost for Enrollment and University Financial Aid. So thanks for joining us, John.
Thank you.
And before we delve into the topic, I want to do one quick shout out to our sponsor tonight, who is GradGuard. With GradGuard's help, we're actually going to select 50 people randomly from whoever registered tonight, and we're going to give away Jeff's book, Who Gets In and Why. So that's a nice bonus for everybody who registered. And for those of you who aren't familiar with GradGuard, they are a technology-enabled pioneer in developing innovative protections designed to reduce the risk of college life. Since 2009, GradGuard has partnered with nearly 400 colleges and universities, and they have protected more than 750,000 students and families. They have a lot of interesting products, and particularly tuition insurance, which helps to financially protect families in case your student can't finish the semester. So thank you, GradGuard. Okay, so we're going to delve into our topic. And I do want to say, if people have questions, that's great. So Barbara said the chat is disabled. Yes, we did disable the chat. We just, honestly, for our sanity, so there's only fewer places to look. If you can put your questions in the Q&A, that would be easier. I'm also looking on Facebook if people have questions there. So, and if you have questions, please put them in. We want to answer as much as we can. So, I mentioned that tonight's topic is to help families build a college list that's financially fit. And the reason why that's so important is we see it a lot that come the May-April timeframe, a lot of families sometimes are surprised at what the cost is of the colleges that their students applied to, when in reality, you can do some better research up front. And so you should really be understanding what those costs are before your student even applies, and it may affect what colleges you put on the list. So we're going to tonight start to understand the differences between different institutions and their financial aid policies. And we're also going to do a deeper dive into Jeff's buyers and sellers rubric, which a lot of people, again, maybe you've heard, but we're going to go into detail about that, what that is. And it should really give people a framework for how to look at colleges and institutions and how to create that college list. So let's get started from the beginning. And I'm going to ask John, since you are in financial aid, if you can just give people some basic definitions. So we're all kind of starting out on the same, understanding, and just tell us really, what need-based aid is, what merit aid is, what you guys do at Emory. I think it would really, set the stage for everybody.
Thanks, Debbie. This is going to be fun. Well, let me rephrase that. This is going to be fun, at least for me. I may be one of the only people in the entire Zoom that finds financial aid not just a necessary evil, but I actually find it exciting and fascinating. So you all will have to bear with my nerdiness around that. So spoiler alert, financial aid is complicated. And fair warning, some of the least complicated parts of financial aid that you may be exposed to will be the next few slides that we're going to take a quick look at.
Okay, I'll pull those up, John.
Yeah, this is extremely high level, but we can get as deep as detailed as questions or as our other panelists want to go. So why does need-based, and I'm going to start with need-based financial aid. Merit-based financial aid is has a lot of to it, but there's a level of complexity around need-based aid that is a lot of folks find incredibly daunting. So what is it? Do colleges have it? Basically, we put it in place so that higher ed can be accessible to students who could not otherwise afford institutions. As an example, total cost of attendance, and everybody take a deep breath, total cost of attendance at university, and that's tuition, room, board, personal expenses, travel, books and supplies is. So how could we possibly be accessible to families who make less than 72 grand? Need-based financial aid. So it allows institutions like Emory to construct a class. We are able to and build a class based on excellence and defined very broadly. So that excellence can include academics, extracurricular, athletics, all sorts of aspects of the student high school experience. So that's at the heart of the need-based financial aid picture. So Jeff, if you'll hit next. So what is financial need? So we have to figure out, for a need-based system, we have to figure out what financial need is. And sort of to come to this relatively simple calculation is the financial aid application. So there is the FAFSA, that's the free application for federal student aid. And for about 400 institutes, maybe 2/3 of them being undergrad, there is the CSS profile, which is another College Board product that actually does a significantly better job measuring a student's financial need than the FAFSA does. But regardless, it is a financial aid application in which we measure a family's income, assets, the size of the family, and the number in college. Push it through a bunch of tables, through a bunch of calculations, and we come to an expected family contribution. So we start in again, this is the simplest slide that you'll see about financial aid. In our calculation, we start with the total cost of attendance. We subtract from that an added parent and student contribution to come to a family contribution, an expected family contribution. And what's left over is this yellow box. That's the student's financial need. So cost minus EFC, that is a student's financial need. How an institution fills that yellow bucket, fills that yellow box, is really at the heart of the selection process that you all will be making as parents and students about making the right financial fit. So Jeff, if you'll hit the slide. How do we fill that yellow box? How do we fill that yellow bucket on the institutional side, on the college and university side? Well, it's really two very simple ways. One is gift aid. It sounds nice. It is nice. Gift aid comes from federal sources. You may have heard of the federal Pell Grant, which is for our neediest students. There are state grants and scholarships. And of course, there are institutional grants and scholarships. At a place like Emory, our institutional aid outpaces federal aid, for example, federal gift aid by about 8 or 9 times. So it is what we've used, that yellow bucket is institutional grant and scholarship. And that can be true at institutions like Emory when it comes to need-based aid. But those grants and scholarships, that scholarship portion can also include merit scholarships. So if a family has financial need, a merit scholarship can go to fill up the yellow bucket. There's also self-help aid, which sounds like there's a little bit more of a trick to it. And there is. The student has to, for the first portion of this, the student has to earn that portion of aid. Federal, in most cases, we call it work study. It is, you're not paid to study. These are jobs at the library, at the center. They are jobs to support research. They are jobs that have the service for them. And they range from about 8 to 12 hours. And of course, student loans. So need-based student loans that from the federal government, that would be in the vast majority of cases, the federal direct loan. But there are also institute loans that go to meet need. Right. So how does Emory approach this beautiful landscape? Well, about 90, depending on the student or the year, about 92% of Emory's financial aid, gift aid, is need-based. So we have between 8 and 10% that would be focused on merit-based. We do have, as I mentioned before, merit-based scholarships that do go to meet a student's need. From the student's perspective, from the family's perspective, $1 is $1. If you have need-based aid, you want those dollars to be overwhelmingly the shipping grant variety. So that's a really quick overview.
Could you maybe, John, clarify a little bit? You talked about merit aid as it helps a family who have need, but other colleges might use merit aid in a different way. You know, it could be different than the way Emory does.
Right. So if a family has completed a need aid application, so they've got that yellow box, they got that yellow bucket. The source of filling that can be merit. These could be scholarships for which is selected based on something other than need, or that could be need-based. It could be need-based, and I'm being told that my audio is breaking, and Jeff is telling me someone else may be streaming, and that may be. I think we've all got life. So if he's up, please let. Emory is an institution that is committed to meeting full demonstrated needs. So what that means for us then is that yellow bucket, whatever it is for that student, we will fill that completely with work study in about half of need-based cases, and for the other half, we will add some loan in there, some need-based loan as well. But overwhelmingly, it is grant-based aid that fills that bucket. Depending on the institution, they may be using merit much more heavily, and they may not be filling that yellow bucket. So a family could apply for need-based aid, have their need identified, but that yellow bucket is not completely filled. So they may have a $50,000 need, but the institution provides $30,000 and says, the rest is unmet need. And that's in the industry, that's called gapping. They're not going to tell you you're being gapped, but that would be the difference between an institution like Emory and an institution that has more limited resources for need-based aid.
And Debbie, I'm just going to sneak in here because I think that's a very important thing for parents and students to know, what John just described as gapping, because there's very few institutions that do what Emory does, and that is meet full demonstrated need. And I think that word demonstrated need is very critical, because you may think, well, we have more needs, but it is based on your demonstrated need. But a lot of colleges do not meet demonstrated need. They do what John just described, which is gapping. And I'll put a link in there to a story that I did back in February about the increasing gapping that's going on in higher education in general. Go ahead, Kim. Sorry.
Yep, Kim.
Yeah, I think that one of the biggest misconceptions that I see that parents have is they think that, they fill out their FAFSA and they get their EFC and they think, oh, okay.
That's all I have to
the
pay.
school is just going to give me the money to reach this often ridiculous number that they can't even afford anyway. There is no law or requirement that a school meet your, any school meet your financial need. So that's, it's not, and in fact, as Jeff pointed out, I think like 98% of colleges do not meet full demonstrated need. So it does seem a little times like a little cruel exercise for you to have to go through and, have a financial x-ray or, financial colonoscopy or whatever the CSS profile is. And then the school doesn't even meet the need anyway. So that's very frustrating. And that's probably why a lot of parents and families get upset.
Hey, Kim, do you want to share a little bit more about how you've seen schools use merit aid and kind of your thoughts about it?
Yeah. So, okay. So I don't like the term merit aid because of course all of our students have merit, just as all of our school students have needs. I mean, who can afford $72,000 a year, right? But of course, nobody likes to think that they're needy. So, I mean, what we see is a lot of schools, not Emory, I'm going to give them a pass, but a lot of schools are moving their aid away from calling it needs aid and calling it merit aid. And I think Jeff, first of all, Jeff's book is great. Highly recommend it. He doesn't pay me a penny to endorse it. It's really good. I think he pointed out something like 40% of recipients of merit aid had SAT scores below 1,000 or something, right? I mean, so schools are just using this to make you feel good. They're just doing it. I like to call it either trophy aid, because it's a trophy, or I like to switch it around and say there's need-based aid based on the student's need. And then there's the school's need, like how much does the school need that student? So they're both need-based aid, it's just who needs who. So that's my little rant. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. So.
No, that's a great way of twisting it. And I mean, another term that people might hear also is a tuition discount. And that kind of goes, Kim, to your comment about how much the school might need those students. And so they're willing to discount what the tuition cost is.
Yeah, I think in Jeff's book, he calls it a coupon, right? Yep. Two. I don't know.
It's no different than the Macy's coupon you get coming into the store.
Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
So one quick question we have, that's a John, way from somebody of twisting it, asking if a student has financial need, does that impact the admissions process?
What a setup! This is perfect. this is a great question. So I'm able to uncork the person's favorite line is, it depends. So it depends on the institution, and we will get back to the world of Emory, and we may be talking about the 2 or 3 percenters, and then we'll shift to the rest of the universe. So schools that are need blind are schools that evaluate a student without any consideration of their financial health or wealth. So they admit students based on their academic strength, not on their financial strength. That in the world of private colleges and universities, that is a fairly rare. It's like meeting full demonstrated need, but even narrower. It's a fairly rare instance where the school is able to resources to be able to be need blind. That is to not evaluate that student's ability to pay. Need aware, and if schools are need blind, because it's expensive, and it's sort of a gold star for the schools. Schools that are need aware will take a look at the family's ability to pay. And, Timmy and Susie in all other aspects are completely equal, but Timmy can afford to pay and Susie can afford to pay. Susie may wind up on the wait list at one of these schools and be admitted. So that is, it's a great question. Now, every public university in the country is basically need blind. That is, they are just admitting students, but there could be significant financial gapping there.
And Jeff, I don't know if you want to add, because you had you saw some of this, at the school, or one of the schools in particular that you were at when you were gathering information for your book.
Yeah. So Debbie, a couple of quick things. First of all, I put in the chat on Zoom, and we could grab that and put it into the Facebook chat as well. A piece that actually ran on Road to College was an excerpt from the book around Lafayette, because as John mentioned, so for who gets in and why, I embedded myself in the admissions process at 3 colleges and universities: the University of Washington, Emory University, and Davidson College. Emory and Davidson are need blind, and they meet full need of their students, which, as John said, is incredibly rarefied air. And most colleges, if they're need blind, they don't necessarily meet full need. And then they gap students like we were talking about earlier, or they're need aware. And so the link I put in there is of Lafayette College, which is a need aware college. And at some point in the admissions process, usually near the very end, they will know how much money their admissions, their admit bin costs them. And they'll say, well, our admit bin will cost us $100 million in financial aid, and our budget's only $50 million, or whatever it means, obviously round numbers. And then they will look at taking out the students who are too expensive and maybe not exactly who they want from an admission standpoint. This is a very difficult process, as I describe at Lafayette, where they have to knock out these students to make their budget. But in some ways, they believe it is better to do that than to do what we were describing earlier, which is gapping, basically accepting the students. But when the students get their financial aid package, it will cost them so much on their side in order to pay for this, that in essence, they're really denying them, right? And so sometimes it's called admit deny, where you're admitting the student, but you're really denying them because you're not giving them all the financial aid that they absolutely need. Debbie, can I go back 1 second to, because I saw some of the questions around merit-based aid and need-based aid. And as Kim describes in my book, I talk about these as buyers and sellers, right? So that there are 2 groups of colleges out there. There are the sellers, which are only about 50 or 60 colleges or universities, Emory being one of them, Davidson being another, and a group of about 50 or 60 institutions that dedicate most of their financial aid to need-based aid. They don't have to give coupons out or merit-based aid or trophy-based aid, as Kim says, because they are sellers. They have something to sell. They have way many more applications than they need to fill a class. They can actually fill a class 8, 9 times, 10 times over with highly qualified students. So they don't need to discount their tuition. The vast majority of colleges and universities are, as I described in the book, they're buyers. This is not a binary system, so they're somewhere on the spectrum of buyers. Some are really extreme buyers and will give out a lot of coupons, a lot of merit-based aid to try to draw students to them. Some others don't have to give as much. But here's a great example. I think at Emory, 90+% of their aid is spent on need-based aid. And at a place like Tulane, for example, 50% of their aid might be spent on need-based aid, where the other 50% is spent on non-need-based aid, meaning merit aid. So I think what's really important, and as I point out in the book, Debbie, is that as students and parents are looking at colleges, really understand early on in the process how their aid policy works. Because as you were mentioning, and as Kim was mentioning, you don't want to be finding this out in April or May, or really March or April or May, because by that time, you're either accepted or you're accepted at these colleges, and you can't go back and reapply to colleges based on what their financial aid policies are. So I think it's really important, as we're thinking about putting together that college list right now, that you are thinking about the academic fit of the institution, the social fit of the institution, but that third piece is the financial fit. And I do not think, based on the research for my book, that enough parents and students think about that financial fit.
I agree with you, Jeff. And you made a comment in one of your writings, which kind of struck me. And I think people don't focus that much on the financial fit. And because of that, they spend all their time on the academic and even like the emotional side of going to college. And it's probably because they can't get their hands around how to figure out, what the financial fit is. So you started kind of mentioning them understanding a school's financial aid policy. Any more specifics about like where they can look or what numbers to be looking at?
Yeah, and I think both John and Kim and John could talk a little bit about the net price calculator and some of the other tools that are out there to figure out what you might pay at a specific college. But what I'm basing is a school a discounter, or are they really focusing their aid on need-based aid? Most colleges discount, and some colleges discount by a lot, right? So those are, again, in my construct earlier that I was talking about, my framework, those are the buyers. It's really kind of the most selective colleges, places like Emory and Davidson, and selective, by the way, public universities as well, that are really dedicating most of their financial aid to need-based aid. And what I found in reporting the book is that if you're only focused on that bumper sticker on the back of your car, right? That, oh, I want my kids to go to a selective college, but say you make too much money to qualify for need-based aid, but not enough to write that full check. That's where you're going to kind of get stuck in the middle at some of these schools, where you may not get it, even though it's a great school, they're going to dedicate most of their money to the neediest students, and you may just get kind of caught in the middle, and you might actually be better off at a buyer. And the thing to remember about these buyer schools that I talk about, that doesn't mean they're like second-class schools academically. In fact, there are some very good schools that do give out discounts. And I think to understand this better is really important earlier on in the process. But I think that John and Kim could talk more about the specific tools that allow you to try to figure out what you might get at a school.
Kim, tell us.
Okay, well, one thing I just want to stress is when Jeff is talking about buyers and sellers, he's really focusing, I think, and please correct me if I'm wrong here, on private colleges.
No, both public and private. It's a little bit harder to figure out the buyers and sellers on the public side, but there are a decent amount of University of Alabama comes to mind, right? That give out a lot of merit-based aid to try to attract students to Alabama.
Especially from out of state.
Especially from out of state, exactly.
But I mean, for the 80% of students go to public colleges, but the vast majority go to the public colleges in their state. So for those students, it's pretty cut and dry. There are very few that do this whole holistic, application process. If you're applying to your regional state college or something, it's a lot less stressful. And you can look at the net price calculator. One tool that I like is, and Jeff mentions this, there's something called the common data set, which you wouldn't know, but sites like collegedata.com, you can go there and it's free, and you can look up on the Money Matters tab, and you can look at what percentage of need that school has met in the past. And I think Money still has that also. So please go back to my old employer, money.com. But my question for John and Jeff is, these numbers tell you, this school meets 80% of need or whatever, or that was in the past. I mean, this year is going to be so different. Are those statistics that we used to be able to look up and kind of guess what they were going to do next year, is that still going to be true? Does anybody want to talk about
John could answer that the best.
The short answer is yes. And the longer answer is yes. And let's just see how things go. Let's see how this pandemic sort of winds itself out. The reality of an institution like Emory is we are committed philosophically. We're committed at the board level. We're committed at the presidential level to meeting full demonstrated need. We're committed at those levels to be need blind. And so there are other things that will be adjusted. There are other things that will be cut in order to support our students. The reality of how this pandemic is going to play out in our pool, in Emory's specific pool, is still happening. And the unfortunate thing, and possibly also the fortunate thing, is that we have we have a great recession that we can look back on and take a look and see how that played out for us. And there was really, I was actually at Davidson when the recession hit, and that played out over a year. 18 months later was the point at which the worst portion of the Great Recession was hitting our families. And that is in part both connected to the income information that is collected. So it is, at that point, it was the prior year's income information. We now live in a prior year income world. So in other words, if you have a student who is going to school in the fall of 2021, it is the income from 2019, from 2 years prior, that will be evaluated. A lot of families get very nervous about that. And schools like Emory, and this is a school by school process, schools like Emory will have an appeal process to say, okay, if your finances have been significantly impacted by anything, and we have this every single year, it's unfortunate that we have a worldwide impact this year, but if you've had an impact to your income, please let us know. We will do what we can to meet your need as it is defined now. That is, again, we're talking about the rareness of the schools that are able to do this. Some schools will say, listen, the fall semester is based on where you are right now. We'll take another look for spring semester. Other schools might say, hey, as your income catches up, your income tax return catches up with our evaluation process, that's when you'll see the benefit of it. So it really can depend. It is maddeningly complicated from school to school. But that is, the theme of this conversation of do your research, be in touch with the financial aid offices and the financial aid web pages. There is one other tool. My Intuition is the best. And I think it's about 40 schools. Emory and Davidson are both using these, but it is basically a 6-7 question estimator of what the school will cost. If you are a straight wage earner and you are looking at a school that uses this My Intuition tool, you could literally figure out, you get a really good 90% accurate calculation by the time I finish the sentence. I mean, it is really, really fast. It is really efficient. And rather than making a calculation, My Intuition takes a data set from the school itself. So you were talking about the common data set. It takes a data set from the school itself and compares that family to a similar family in that school's data set. But again, it's 40 schools that are using it. So it's not as broad as I would hope it would be.
That's actually a great topic. That sounds like a whole nother discussion. I'd love to know more about My Intuition and why other schools can't do it. But Kim, you had a comment?
Yeah, this is, we're going to talk about this later, but maybe.
I know, right.
This whole question of appealing for more aid. I mean, I don't know anybody whose income hasn't been affected or job hasn't been affected just about by COVID. Written into the federal law is every college financial aid officer is empowered to do what's called a professional judgment review or special circumstances review. Those are the terminology that actually written into the law. So you have every right as a parent, and you probably should, if you have been affected at all by, if your income is not what it was when you filled, for the years that you filled the FAFSA out for 2 years ago, you should write to the colleges your kid is considering, ask for a professional judgment review, and explain, I lost my job, I was furloughed, my restaurant shut down, or now we had to pay $1 million for COVID tests, whatever, and explain why what you wrote in your FAFSA does not reflect your current reality. At the very least, they will adjust your eligibility for federal and state aid. It's written right in the law, they can do it. And hopefully, they'll adjust the institutional aid as well.
And Kim, you were, in the previous conversation we had, you were kind of suggesting that families maybe even start that now because they already know that their income has been affected.
Right. If you can, if you filled out the FAFSA, which I hope you have done, or if you have not done it, do it now. You'll get back your student aid report, all this great terminology, and that'll have your EFC, your expected family contribution, which is a ridiculous phrase and it doesn't reflect reality, but whatever. And as soon as you get that back and you go, ah, right, you know, I can't afford that, then sit down and look at why you can't afford it and what you can afford, and, you know, have some documentation as to, you know, here's my unemployment, my layoff notice, or here's, you know, whatever you can. You need to document your needs, because I think people like John probably, I'm sure everybody asks for more money, but people like John probably want, well, you know, prove to me that you really need more money, right? I assume that you want some documentation, right? So yeah, I mean, once you get your student aid report and your EFC back, you should start prepping your appeal.
And John, are you expecting more than normal of these types of requests this year?
Yeah, we've already got more than normal. Yes, we have, and we are. It is unfortunate that we have fairly recent experience having gone through this. Financial aid folks are old and we stay in the same place. So we've seen this. This is a different kind right now. This is a different kind of recession. It's a different kind of, I don't know, Jeff, is it a depression yet? I don't know.
Yeah.
Home equity, the things that were hitting typical college going families were, as far as we can see right now, outside of unemployment, outside of being laid off or furloughed, the primary asset for families being, for college going families being a house, that was much more devastating in the Great Recession. Unemployment is a much bigger deal right now. So it is, we are seeing some of that, and we're seeing a lot of it. So our appeal budget, our special circumstances appeal budget has tripled so far this year, but we have pushed tons of new aid to students as well. So it is, it's going to be continue to be a very interesting year. Yeah,
and it's actually amazing and fascinating to hear that you just said the financial appeal budget tripled. And that's, at a place like Emory, which, they can afford it. But, Jeff, there was a comment earlier. Somebody asked, does the endowment have much to do with whether a college is a buyer or a seller? I don't know if you have any thoughts about that.
Well, usually, in my calculation, it was really around selectivity and around how much money they put into non-need-based aid. The more money they put into non-need-based aid, meaning quote unquote merit aid, that made them more likely to be a buyer. Sellers, to be honest with you, because they're highly selective, tend to be wealthier institutions, tend to have higher endowments. It's not a one-to-one necessarily way of looking at it, but yes, sellers tend to have bigger endowments. Buyers tend to have smaller endowments, which is one of the reasons why they need to discount tuition, because they're trying to discount tuition to get some revenue in the door in order to fill their class.
Yep, Kim, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just looking at some of the questions. I just want to clarify. So how do you correct, if you feel the FAFSA does not, or CSS profile does not correctly reflect your reality, there are two steps you take. First is you go back and you make sure you filled everything out right on your FAFSA and your CSS profile. You can correct those if you need to. But if it is accurately reflecting 2019, but not your current financial reality, then you send a letter to the school, right? And I don't know if you would send it before you hear about admissions. I'm not sure that's productive. I don't know. John, what do you think?
Well, we call those preemptive appeals on the fight. So that there are two thresholds there. One is whether you've been admitted or not, and the other is whether you've gotten a financial aid package or not. And appealing nothing is, we typically say, let us do our work, because we can see a lot more about what's going on. But again, that's Emory. That's schools like Emory and Davidson. Kim, I want to underscore what you said before. financial aid folks, and you the unflattering term. This is like a physical, right? We are looking at some of your most intimate details. Many folks would rather stand naked rather than have you review all of their income tax returns, their assets, and all those things. However, we are not necessarily interested in the same stories that the admission office would be interested in. That is, yes, we understand that there are all sorts of details, all sorts of emotional things that are going on, and we are very sympathetic, but we need to see documentation. We need to see numbers. We need to see, and you, Kim, that was a great point you made. If there's an unemployment check, yes, let's see it, because guess what? That's a check. We want to be able to see what your actual situation is. Professional judgment that you discussed, we can make institutional professional judgment. We can make a federal professional judgment. And great point, professional judgment only impacts federal aid. However, if there is a story to be told for a school that has some stake in their institutional aid to you, let us know. And Jeff, I'm sure that you've run into this as well. It is the appeal for some institutions that triggers a higher level of interest from the student, which can actually help the school say, oh, okay, this is a more interested family. Let's get them some money.
Yeah, I think Debbie, John brings up a good point there, right? This idea of, are we going to give this money to this student and they're only going to use it to try to get more money out of the other school they're more interested in, right? So I think through this process, the school can also get an interest. Are we actually going to yield the student? Meaning, is the student actually going to enroll at the school?
So John, I want to actually pick on one thing you said earlier on when you were talking about financial need, and you mentioned the CSS profile, how it asks a lot more information, and a lot of families are like, oh, that was a horrible process to go through, right? But I wanted to actually, maybe you can explain, and I heard this from another financial aid officer once who said, yes, they ask for a lot more on the CSS profile, but it's really to have a better understanding. It's not to necessarily make judgments about how you're spending your money. And the other thing they once said to me was, it's also to really put families kind of in I hate to say this, but in a ranking of need. It's not to say as Kim said, every family has a need, but it's how is your need relative to the other families who are asking for the money?
Those are all great points, Debbie. I'll give you a really, really simple example of the difference between the FAFSA and the CSS profile. The FAFSA asks for custodial household information only. So little Timmy is living with mom. Dad is super involved. Dad is his soccer coach. But if he's living with mom 51% of the time, it's only mom's information that's going to be included in the FAFSA. Schools like Emory, we believe that it is a parent responsibility. The parent does not divorce the kid. So we reconstruct that sort of biological or adoptive family and say, okay, it's mom and dad. You're both in this. We collect both their sets of information and we make a calculation based on parents, not on custodial household. So that's an example of how it is better information. And it's, yeah, you're right. We live in glass houses. We are not making judgments about people. We are just trying to meet the need of the students that we can. We want these students. That's a really important thing. We want these students. We really, really do. If they've been admitted, these are fantastic kids. We want to get them.
And there was a question earlier on, which I thought was a really good question. This is again for you, John. Somebody was asking, you were explaining how, and maybe the example at Emory, that some merit aid is given to families that have, demonstrated need. And so the question was, is it better to get that merit aid versus the need-based aid, from year to year? Does that mean that they will continue to get that merit aid in the second year, or how does that change, in the second and third, fourth year?
It's a great question. For Emory, the answer is yes, they will get it as long as they meet the criteria of the merit scholarship, which is typically a very low GPA that they have to maintain. That is not always the case. It is much more the case than it is not, but it is not always the case. And there was a second part to your question that
so is that if the family, not that they get the choice, but
right.
if their students awarded the merit aid versus the need-based aid, is that kind of better for that family for the 4 years?
It is more stable.
Yes, yeah.
In other words, if a parent is expecting or, sort of stumbles into a big promotion and they are pushed out of the need-based aid picture, so in that case, it would be stable, and that's great. Or there are 4 factors, very simplistically, 4 factors that we look at: income, assets, size of family, number in college. Having 2 in college, by the federal definition, having 2 in college reduces the parent contribution, the biggest portion of that expected family contribution, by 50%. So you take that parent contribution as the numerator, the denominator of number in college, that's the parent contribution. If you have 2 and you go to 1, having that solid, that reliable merit-based scholarship, let's call it $20,000, $25,000 throughout that time, that means, okay, regardless of my need, this scholarship will stay with my student throughout their 4 years. Those are 2 instances. My last thought on it is, if somebody gives you $10 and says, here's $10 because you're smart, and here's $10 because you need it, I'm not sure you care.
Right. Other than, as you're pointing out, sometimes the need might shift and change from year to year. Kim?
Yeah, so there's actually, there's been some research that shows that a third of families are willing to accept a smaller merit named scholarship because it sounds so prestigious. So, how much is the bragging rights worth? The second thing is, John is exactly right. So the question of whether it's merit or need, what you're choosing is, what will it take to get it renewed? Mm-hmm. And so if it's quote, need-based aid, if your income and assets remain the same, you'll get the same. If your quote need remains the same, in other words, good point, if you have another kid in college or whatever. I mean, if you're looking at your oldest and you have some other kids coming up, go with the need-based aid, because in 2 years it'll go up, right? But the merit-based aid, at schools like Emory, it's pretty easy to get it renewed, but at other schools and other programs, kids lose their merit scholarships. The very famous example is in Georgia, the Hope Scholarship, where the high schoolers have to have a 3.0 to get this Hope Scholarship, and 50% of those kids have their grades drop below a 3.0 in their freshman year and lose the Hope Scholarship in Georgia, 50%. So that's because college is actually harder than high school. Most people don't realize that. And a few people freshman year, first time, they kind of go a little crazy. So be very careful about the renewal terms. And I know that's something that Jeff has advised in his book about making sure to ask about renewal terms.
Yeah, I think it's really important. Kim and I disagree a little bit on this, I think, because there's differing research about this whole idea of front loading, which I know some colleges do because they've admitted it to me, where they are putting more institutional aid into the incoming students, because the idea is once we hook them in and they really like it here, we could actually reduce their package a little bit on the merit side, because they like it here so much, they'll figure out a way to pay for it. I think it's incredibly misleading in some ways, but some colleges do it. And so again, I think John and Kim are correct. I think you want to ask, what is the renewal process for it? How much of this aid will be there next year for me if I perform the way you expect me to perform? Ask those questions. I think it's really important.
Especially if that money, the merit aid money, is kind of what's helping you afford the college. So, if something happens, and Kim, as you said, it's not unreasonable that a student might not realize that transition from high school to college and they can't meet whatever the requirement is. And then the next year they lose that merit money. And all of a sudden this has become a much more expensive school for the family. That's a shocker. Yep.
Yeah, I just want to add one more danger of merit aid. And that is if the student is so concerned about keeping their grades up, they're going to take easy classes. They're just going to, focus on the grades. And really you want them to learn something and stretch themselves and take a daring class and maybe participate in a extracurricular activity that takes time. So, there is a danger to just focusing just on grades, because then it's just grades and it's not the learning experience you want a college to be.
John, did you want to add?
Yeah, just very, very quickly, there is you also have to meet basic academic standards to keep your need-based aid as well. It's called satisfactory academic progress. It is around a 2.0, depends on the institution, depends on how it gets defined, but it involves both GPA, their grade work, but also their progress. So they have to complete the courses that they've taken, and they have to complete their degree. So satisfactory academic progress does put that put those academic guardrails around need-based aid as well.
So Jeff, there's a question here. Holly is asking, wondering what 5 to 6 institutions would you consider your favorite buyers?
Oh, I saw that question. I was hoping you wouldn't ask me. There are some really good ones out there, right? And I have if you go to my website, jeffselingo.com/buyers and sellers, you can actually see a graphic up there where I say, if you're considering this seller, maybe consider also this buyer as another possibility, right? And I give 10 examples there. They're not necessarily my favorites. I don't like to say they're my favorites, but I think what they do is show you, if you have one on the list, you can also have this other on the list. University of Michigan and Pittsburgh, right? Carleton and a couple of others like McAllister and and some others, right? So there are a bunch on there that I highly recommend if you go there. I don't like to say they're my favorites, but it's critical there.
So the point is, academically, there can be schools that are very similar, and then it just comes down to what their philosophy is on how what their financial aid policies are. And that's, everything that we've been talking about tonight that people need to dig into, besides just, what majors they have and what the dorms are like. Families should be looking at how the colleges give out money and all of these numbers that we're talking about related to financial aid policies. But I wanted to get 2 topics before the hour ends. And one is related to early decision, because that's coming up for, a big date, November 1st for a lot of schools. And any opinions from anybody, any thoughts about, whether or not schools give out different money, based on whether a student is applying early decision? Should that affect, whether somebody decides to apply early decision to a school? Will they get a different financial aid offer or merit offer, whether that's early or later on in the process?
I think, and then John could correct me or talk more specifically about it, but I think it goes back to those types of schools that John was talking about earlier. If you're applying early decision to a need-blind school that meets full need, your package is not going to be that much different, if different at all, if you apply early or regular. Some other schools, though, it may be different, right? They may not give you as much aid if they're not a meet full need student, a meet full need school. They might give you less aid, because the one thing that early decision shows is you're really interested in going there. Because early decision means you're committed to going if you get in. And so that is the number one determination of, your commitment to going there. And the school says, well, we don't really have to give much aid to this student, merit-based aid, because they really want to come here. So I think you really have to know the financial aid policies of that school to determine how much impact that's going to have.
Yes, I agree completely. There are two other factors. If you need to shop around, whether it's a school that has merit or need, if you need to, and shop and compare schools that have need, because we are different institutions. Early decision, I mean, if you absolutely have to shop, early decision is not the decision for you. You need to go with an early action or a regular decision process. There is a wrinkle to, and Jeff is right, intuitively, it makes sense. Hey, listen, these folks are, the student's mind, if they come early decision. There's another approach, and it is, we are flush with cash at early decision. This kid, we are going to spend our money on this kid. And there are institutions very much like schools that Jeff has mentioned that will say, hey, listen, we're in great shape right now. We won't be in great shape in March. And I was a director of college counseling, and those early decision need-based aid packages from need-aware schools were sweet for my kids.
That's such an interesting point. And I guess, and I'm not yet looking through the questions, but I'm sure somebody's going to ask, and we talked earlier, but so how do we really know whether a school's need aware? We're talking about it. You kind of know after the fact by looking at some of the offers. I mean, can somebody, I rarely have ever seen that on a website, can families ask that question?
Yeah. And if you're need blind, we will tell you. Again, it is expensive to be need blind. It is a demonstration of your commitment to access and affordability. So we will tell you. Jeff, I years ago I kept track of this on Wikipedia. I think that you could look on Wikipedia for need blind schools, and there is a relatively good, not great, list there. But I don't know, Jeff, if you've got other resources, or Kim, that if you all have tracked resources through the magazine.
Kim may have resources. I know Mark Kantrowitz tracks some of this out there on his website. John, I actually had a quick question for you, because it didn't come up as a question, but I think it's a good one, because I think the question people always ask is, well, how much do I really know what I'm going to get from this school, right? We talked earlier you talked about my intuition. Every college is required to have a net price calculator under federal law. Can you talk a little bit about the difference between the net price calculator and something my intuition, which, as you said, is only available at 40 plus schools, might spit out?
Absolutely. So the net price calculator is an actual calculator. So the methodology that we utilize in the financial aid office, those tables, those calculations are made as the student or parent plugs in their income, asset, size of family, number in college, information into the net price calculator. Net price calculators at schools that have significant merit will also ask questions about GPAs, SAT, ACTs, other interests, and they are able to make calculations, particularly the schools that have really clear thresholds around how you qualify for merit-based aid. So it's a calculation. For my intuition, it is we provide them with a set of awards with specifics about family size and income and assets, and those calculations go straight to that database and pull out similar looking families.
So it sounds like it's more accurate, is what you're saying. My intuition.
My intuition is much quicker. And it can be accurate if you look exactly like some of the families that are in the data set. Okay. If you are not, it can be off. Business owners have a problem with, but just to be clear, if your primary source of income is a small or large business, the process is even more complicated. We collect business tax returns. I've seen hundreds of pages of tax returns, and going through those, so being able to do that on your own through the net price calculator or through my intuition is tricky.
Kim?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that there is a wide variety in the quality of net price calculators. Emory's, I'm sure, is great. And a lot of them do it through this college board. So you get, it's actually much more convenient because you sign in once, you don't have to fill in your information over and over again. But, and I haven't checked this in a while, but for a while, NYU's was terrible. You know, it was based on like 4-year-old data. It was the least they could do because I guess they didn't care. Maybe they've improved it. But so some of the net price calculators are not very good. And Jeff, you mentioned in your book 2 interesting companies that are posting, like crowdsourcing.
Yeah, I mean, they're basically doing what my intuition does, and we're starting to get better information on this. You know, Debbie, there's a great question that comes up often in the Q&A, and maybe John could address this. It's this idea of like, if you're should you file the FAFSA if you you know, especially now as you're applying, if you think, well, I could actually afford college and maybe that might affect my, you know, my ability to apply for financial aid. How does it, you know, whether you put that on the Common App or whether you file the FAFSA, where does that come into the admissions process? Because I know a lot of people worry about that. Like if I say I'm going to need aid, right, even though I may not, you know, as Kim said, fill out the FAFSA. Well, what if I fill out the FAFSA and I actually really don't need the aid? Then is that going to impact my my admissions possibilities?
The fortunate thing is that admission in need-aware schools, admission and financial aid offices are actually communicating. So whether you check, I will need aid or I won't need aid, we will see that through that communication. Now, if it is, I won't need aid, I don't apply for financial aid until after I've been admitted, you can still complete the FAFSA. You are still eligible for federal aid, but those institutions very likely, not always, but very likely will say, I'm sorry, you know, this is a process. Here the Parent Plus loans, here are your federal loans, here's your work study. Congratulations, you have these resources to pull from. Another plug for the Emorys of the world, we have plenty of students who apply for financial aid after they've been admitted. We still stack them up with need-based aid and we still fill that yellow bucket because we are the loving institution that
No, well, and in all honesty, that's a great plug for Emory, but
But please don't do that.
Exactly. That's what I'm going to say. I'm going to say for most families, don't rely on that. So if you need the aid, fill out the FAFSA and do it as part of the process. Don't think, I'm not going to fill it out. My kid will get in and then I'll ask them for aid because you'll be even in worse situation. Okay. So how about kind of as a closing, and we touched on it earlier, but Jeff, I actually saw you did an interview, I don't know if it was this past week or the week before, with the Common App, and they were talking about, you know, declines that they were seeing in, you know, at least at this point in the year of applications coming through. You know, we've heard about the numbers declining in terms of freshmen starting. How do you think, like, I know this is, you know, nobody's going to hold you to your prediction, but what do you think this is going to mean for this coming year and maybe even for the way colleges are willing to give out money to attract students or maybe to secure them for coming?
So I think the one answer is a little bit easier than the other. And this is the one question I get all the time is all these students, quote unquote, deferred admission to next fall from the class of the high school graduating class of 2020. In other words, they were supposed to start college this fall. They decided to defer next year. And we know from the National Student Clearinghouse enrollment numbers that first year enrollment was down by a lot more than all other undergraduate enrollment this year. So it did happen, but every school is different, by the way. Some schools had a lot of deferrals. Some schools had the normal set of deferrals. I don't know what John saw at Emory, but one thing I do know about enrollment management is you want to keep your overall enrollment pretty steady. Right. So schools don't want suddenly next year's sophomore class to be that much smaller. So they're going to figure out how to make up that enrollment somehow. They're going to go get transfer students, or more likely, if they have room, they are going to take more freshmen than normal this year. So you should not think that some kid who deferred his or her enrollment is going to suddenly take your kid's spot next year. Now, so the second piece is around applications. So yes, applications are slower than normal right now. It's hard to know though. We may have a surge this week, for example, for early decision, and all will be well with the world. We may see some students not applying early decision who would have, but I actually think some more students might apply because they might think it might be a little bit easier to get in this year because schools might be taking more kids early decision, more applicants early decision. I also am hearing that some students might want to wait a little bit longer because they haven't been able to get to campus to visit. And as John was saying, they might, or somebody was saying earlier, maybe it was even me, say, oh, maybe there will be more aid available in the spring. On the application front, who knows yet? I think it's too early here in October 25th to really know what's happening on the application front. I think we're going to know a lot more in a couple of weeks.
Kim, you have any thoughts about early decision and what that does to the process?
Well, I mean, after reading Jeff's book, I'm just increasingly convinced that there's a huge admissions advantage in applying early. Jeff, you can correct me if I'm drawing the wrong conclusion from your book. But I think we've pretty much covered the waterfront about the impacts on need-based on aid, and John's point is excellent. If you need to compare offers, you can't apply ED. So I mean, you shouldn't. So.
Okay, well, it's actually over an hour. I think this was a great discussion. Hopefully families got, more than tidbits. They got really good, advice and direction about what to do. I see this is recorded. We will send out a link if people want to look at it again, or if you didn't get a chance to watch the whole thing. And we'll actually send out in the email all the links that were included in the chat, because it's really good information. And I wish everybody good luck with the process this year. And it'd be great to do like a recap, at the end of the season about what really happened versus what we thought was going to happen. So maybe we'll do that.
Good luck, everybody. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Bye-bye.